This will be a short episode of Silicon Bites because so much has been going on, and actually, because we've been traveling, it's been difficult to follow the news and, in fact, catch up and report it back. But this episode specifically brings together a number of stories based on Trump's recent announcements. Well, less announcements, more ultimatums. And this is why I think it's rather interesting to cover these stories. There is a distinct change of tone in Trump's rhetoric. There is a distinct change of tone of what Trump is saying towards Putin and Russia. Well, let's dive into it. Ukraine war latest. Russia responds to Trump's ultimatum on ending the war. It's time to make a deal, announces President Trump of the US. If he does not end Russia's war against Ukraine soon, Trump implies that Putin will face punitive tariffs and sanctions on top of those already imposed. Trump also says he'll ask NATO allies to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is far beyond the current spend and even higher than current US expenditure on defense. This would be a transformational change to many societies with implications that I think he can hardly grasp, and which perhaps many European NATO politicians have barely even begun to think about. Trump did not attend the World Economic Forum in Davos in person, but via a video link announced that he would bring down the cost of oil, because if the price of oil came down, the Russian-Ukraine war would end immediately. It's time to end it, he added. This comes a day after he threatened massive tariffs and sanctions on Russian exports if Putin fails to make a deal to end the conflict, not after 24 hours, but within the first 100 days of Trump taking office. Well, this sounds like a more realistic timeframe. For perhaps the first time, Trump blamed Vladimir Putin for the fact the war had not yet ended. Up until now, he has not directly spoken in negative terms about the Russian president. Asked if he believed the war in Ukraine would end in under a year, Trump said, well, you're going to have to ask Russia. Ukraine is ready to make a deal. And I think this talks to the huge efforts made by Zelensky and his team to build some kind of bridges, some kind of communication with Trump ahead of the election. Although the comments explicitly made by Trump blame the war on Moscow, Trump later made comments suggesting that Ukraine brought some of the culpability for the losses of the war on themselves by the very act of resisting. Once more, some of his supporters claim this is just Trump flinging word spaghetti at the wall or some kind of negotiating tactic. But it has to be said clearly, objectively, the comment is absurd, and of course it can be seen as highly derogatory to Ukrainians who have resisted valiantly to remain alive and free. Is the victim of a burglary guilty if they have nice things to steal? Especially if they've been prevented from securing their house against theft and intrusion by well-meaning friends and allies. Trump's logic on how to apply pressure to Putin is sound, however, and it shows an understanding, well, on the part of his advisors at least, how crucial energy revenues are for funding Putin's war chest. Zelensky told me he wants to make a deal, said Trump. I don't know if Putin does. He might not. I think he should make a deal. I think he's destroying Russia by not making a deal, said Trump. This refers to Russia's failing economy and high inflation rates, which are becoming very hard for Russia to hide. Addressing Davos, Zelensky also sought to appeal to Trump by echoing some of his talking points about the need for Europe to step up and be responsible for its own security, including the call for NATO economies to move to the 5% spending target. One challenge for Europe is to secure their supply of liquefied natural gas at a reasonable market rate. This fact was also recognized by Trump, who said that he would guarantee the security of supply to all of Europe. Yes, I would, he said. I would make sure that you get it. If we make a deal, we make a deal. You'll get it, he claimed. The US is already the EU's second largest gas partner and largest LNG supplier after Russia cut off supplies following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because that has not prevented some countries for continuing to purchase LNG via various routes from Russia. But there may be limited opportunity to boost US exports of LNG in the short term. And of course, Europe may be wary, as potential US EU trade frictions could affect future gas supplies and trading relationships. Well, here's another piece of dissonance. After previously slamming NATO members for their failure to increase defense spending and a whole host of other issues, Trump also struck a tone of reconciliation, saying, "I love Europe. I love the countries of Europe." It seems that Trump may also be applying pressure to Chinese President Xi Jinping, assumed to be one of Russia's key allies, and to force him, in turn, to pressure Putin to end the war. Hopefully, China can help us stop the war. They have a great deal of power over the situation and will work with them. And I mentioned that during our phone call with President Xi, and hopefully we could work together and get that stopped. This is also a comment I find interesting. Soft or indirect criticism of Putin is one thing, but there is a tone of mockery in some of Trump's comments. He pointed to Putin's 2024 presidential election result, which he won with an improbable 88% of the vote, calling it, frankly, ridiculous. If Putin ever held any control or undue influence over Trump, it seems to be weakening its grip. That could potentially be excellent news for Ukraine. If Trump were a Kremlin asset, I could not imagine he would threaten Putin in order to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine the hard way, using tariffs and sanctions, and say that this is the only way to send a strong signal to the Kremlin, or even to refer to Putin's war as ridiculous. The only person who's done that is Yevgeny Prigozhin, and we know what happened to him. Of course, the Kremlin tried to downplay the remarks, even insisting there was nothing new in Trump's threats. This is patently not true, and the change in Trump's tone is highly significant. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov claimed Moscow was ready for an equal and mutually respectful dialogue with the US. Ukrainians will hardly accept this at face value, nor will they accept being cut out of any future negotiation. And I think nor will most European politicians really believe these statements coming out of the Kremlin either. Russia's deputy UN ambassador Dmitry Polyansky warned Moscow would have to see what Trump thinks is a fair deal to end the war, see what that means, adding that for the Kremlin it is first and foremost the question of addressing the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. By this, they probably mean demilitarization, denazification, and all that kind of nonsense. But the root causes of the war are Russia, are Putin. So this statement can be dismissed as absurd from one of Putin's genocidal minions. In a reflection of episodes we've been running on this channel over the last 6 months or so, Zelensky's sanctions commissioner, Vladislav Vlasyuk, said there are at least 10 areas which Mr. Trump can look to target with sanctions in the coming months. Many of you will recall the episodes we also produced on this channel that pointed to the 10 areas of pressure that can be applied to Putin. These can be Russia's fintech sector, companies involved in the development of the e-ruble, central bank digital currency used an alternative to the SWIFT international payment system that Russia is cut off from, and also cryptocurrency payments, he said, among other ideas and opportunities to apply pressure to Putin. There is some evidence that Putin is growing increasingly concerned about distortions in Russia's wartime economy, where more and more information is coming to light about the vast quantities of investment Russia has made in its war machine, and potentially a hidden credit bubble that is also being created to support it. Peskov acknowledged there were problematic factors in Russia's economy, but insisted that Moscow would be able to meet all military requirements incrementally, as well as all welfare and social payments. That, I suspect, is very far from reality. And we should not think that anything that comes out of Peskov's mouth actually affects Russia's reality at this point. NATO chief Mark Rutte warned that a Russian victory over Ukraine would greatly undermine the military alliance's power, and that stopping Putin from threatening members of the alliance would cost far more than supporting Kyiv. Now, again, we've been saying that on the channel from the very start. It would cost trillions to restore NATO's credibility in the event of a Russian victory, Mr. Rutte warned, as he warned Kyiv's backers not to scale back the support they are providing. If Ukraine loses, then to restore the deterrence of the rest of NATO again, it will be a much, much higher price than what we are contemplating at this moment in terms of ramping up our spending and ramping up our industrial production. Mr. Rutte said it will not be billions extra, it will be trillions extra. We have to change the trajectory of the war, Mr. Rutte added, that the West cannot allow in the 21st century that one country invades another country and tries to colonize it. We are beyond those days, he said. And this statement, I think, makes an important point to end this episode on. Russia's imperial war is not only an action out of time, but something also that belongs to an imperial age that we thought to be over more than a century ago. Russia's actions have also shown that imperial wars are costly, ridiculously expensive, in a way that makes no sense in terms of modern, rational economies. In fact, the failure of an imperial war is enough to wreck the state that unleashed it. Imperial wars could well be the death of empire. Let's hope this is true and that Putin's pointless war hastens his demise as leader of Russia and hastens the demise of Russia as an imperial entity.